Welcome to the deep dive. We're really glad to have you here with us today.
Yeah, really excited for this one.
So I want to start by asking you to think about a core assumption that most of us just, operate under. From the time we're kids, society basically tells us that happiness is a chase.
Oh, absolutely. Chase novelty, chase success.
Chase the next big reward.
Right.
We're constantly seeking that next dopamine hit just to feel alive or accomplished. But what if that exact chase, the one that you, me, and everyone else is participating in, is structurally designed to make us suffer?
It's a really radical thought to start with, but an incredibly necessary one. Today we're looking at some excerpts from a fascinating document titled A Structural Model of Human Motivation and Suffering.
Which is quite the title.
It is, but it's essentially a comprehensive roadmap of the human brain's reward and meaning systems. And over the course of this deep dive, we're going to explore three distinct structural layers of human motivation.
The stimulation layer, the emotional layer, and then this third state.
Right, a state of being the source, calls the cruise state. And our mission today is to break these down so that by the end of this, you should have a fundamentally different framework for understanding your own pain, your desires, and why you actually take the actions you do.
Reading through these excerpts really shifted my perspective, honestly. It maps out the exact mechanics of why our brains seem to just betray us when we're trying to find some basic satisfaction.
Yeah.
And discovering that there's this hidden third layer of existing that completely bypasses the suffering. It's pretty wild. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the very first layer of motivation.
We'll begin with the stimulation layer. This is the one you are likely most intimately familiar with because it's entirely driven by the dopamine system.
The classic dopamine rush.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But to understand why it traps us, we have to look at the specific neural structures involved. And it starts with the ventral tegmental area, or the VTA.
The VTA.
Right. Think of the VTA as your brain's spotter. It's the region that initially recognizes a cue and signals, hey, something potentially rewarding is happening over there.
Okay, so the VTA spots the opportunity, but it doesn't actually make you do the work to get it, does it?
No, correct. That signal then travels to the nucleus accumbens,
Right.
which you can think of as the engine of your motivation. It processes that initial signal and converts it into actual drive. But an engine needs steering.
Which brings in the prefrontal cortex.
Yes. Your prefrontal cortex directs your focus, it does the planning, and executes the behavior required to actually go get that reward.
So this is that surface level loop we're all caught in, the dopamine treadmill. The VTA sees the cookie, the nucleus accumbens revs the engine to want the cookie, and the prefrontal cortex figures out how to get to the jar.
That's a great way to put it.
But the source material makes it incredibly clear that this system is a trap. Why does it inevitably fail us in the long run?
Well, the failure is built into its very architecture. The dopamine system is entirely novelty-driven. It relies heavily on the anticipation of a reward, rather than the actual enjoyment of the reward once you have it. Because of that structural reality, it inevitably leads to a rapid development of tolerance.
Yeah.
You need more and more of the stimulus just to get the baseline feeling of satisfaction.
So you get diminishing returns.
Severe diminishing returns.
Yeah.
It forces a constant escalation of stimulation. You are running faster just to stay in the exact same place.
Which is so observable when you look at how we live right now. The text specifically calls out examples we deal with every single day. I mean, it's the reason you find yourself endlessly doom scrolling on social media.
Oh, yeah.
You aren't actually enjoying the content. You're just swiping, getting a tiny hit of anticipation, feeling disappointed by the video, and swiping again.
It's the core mechanic of gambling, too.
Exactly. And it drives massive overconsumption, whether that's buying things online you don't need or constantly seeking validation. Even achievement addiction.
All like needing to hit the next metric at work.
Right, or getting the next promotion. It's just the dopamine treadmill in action. We're chasing a horizon that physically cannot be reached.
What's fascinating here is the evolutionary context behind this. You might ask, why on earth would we evolve a brain structure that leaves us so profoundly unsatisfied?
Yeah, it seems like a design flaw.
It does. But evolutionary biology tells us this system was strictly designed for resource exploration. It was built to keep our ancestors moving, searching for new food sources, new territories, new mating opportunities.
So it wasn't built for happiness.
Absolutely not. It was not designed to provide long-term psychological stability. It is a highly effective, surface-level survival tool for a harsh environment. It's not a recipe for modern psychological well-being.
We're essentially using a tool meant for foraging in the wild to try and find inner peace in a modern, hyperstimulated world.
Right.
Makes total sense why it burns us out. But here's the thing. When the dopamine stops
When
working,
we build up that massive tolerance,
yeah, and the scrolling or the shopping stops feeling good, humans don't just sit down and stare at a wall. According to the text, we shift gears. We move into the second layer of motivation, the emotional layer. And this is all about meaning and moral narratives.
the transition here is profound. When dopamine-driven stimulation becomes insufficient to motivate us, the brain seeks a heavier, more intense fuel source. We transition to meaning-based motivation.
And the brain activity physically changes.
The neural landscape shifts dramatically. We move away from those basic reward centers we just discussed, and the brain heavily activates the amygdala.
And the amygdala is essentially the brain's alarm bell, right? It processes strong primal emotions, particularly fear and threat detection.
It is the alarm bell, yes,
Right.
but it doesn't act alone in this layer. It recruits the anterior cingulate cortex, or the ACC.
Okay.
You could think of the ACC as an error detection system. It's constantly scanning the environment for what is wrong or out of place.
So you combine the alarm bell with the error detector.
Exactly. When you combine the amygdala's emotional intensity with the ACC's error detection, you get a system highly attuned to moral and social violations. Add to that the insula, which processes feelings of disgust.
Including moral disgust.
Yes. And heavy involvement from oxytocin-related systems.
Now, since oxytocin is driving this layer, we're talking about deep biochemical social bonding here. So the second layer creates incredibly strong motivation by building group identity.
Yes.
It allows us to construct these massive, sweeping narratives about our lives and our tribes.
It bonds us together with an intensity that dopamine simply cannot match. The emotional layer is responsible for deep social cohesion. On the surface, that sounds incredibly positive. It's the root of community and shared purpose.
Right.
But because it relies on narrative construction and group bonding to function, it inherently requires drawing boundaries.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The text points out a twist that is hard to swallow but impossible to ignore. While this emotional layer creates that social cohesion, it does so by naturally dividing the world. It inevitably creates an us versus them dynamic.
Always.
In order for there to be a cohesive us, the brain requires of them. It splits the world into right and wrong.
And we must look at this objectively, just as the source material does, without taking any ideological sides. Because of this exact neural structure, the emotional layer is historically responsible for the most explosive and devastating human conflicts.
Yeah.
When you examine religious wars throughout history, ideological revolutions, extreme nationalism, and even the intense everyday political polarization we see across the globe right now.
All over the news.
Exactly. These are all fundamentally driven by this second layer of motivation.
It really doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on or what specific political or social ideology you hold. A debate about tax policy or local zoning laws can quickly feel like a fight for survival.
Because the mechanism in the brain operates exactly the same way for everyone. It's just the meaning-give motivation system doing what it evolved to do.
Right.
That is the critical takeaway regarding the second layer. It has a very specific feature. It transforms raw, primal aggression into moral justification.
Okay, break that down for me.
If you are operating purely on the dopamine layer and you act aggressively, you're just fighting for a resource. You want the apple, so you push someone out of the way to get it.
Simple.
But when you operate on the emotional layer, your aggression is suddenly part of a grand moral narrative. You aren't just taking the apple, you are fighting for justice or righteousness or the greater good.
Wow.
This makes meaning-based motivation far more socially explosive and far more dangerous than mere dopamine-driven behavior, because there is no natural limit to justified aggression.
So to recap where we are for a second, dopamine leads to addiction, escalation, and deep dissatisfaction. The emotional narrative layer leads to ideological conflict, polarization, and justify aggression.
That's the summary, yes.
If both of these primary motivational engines inevitably lead us to personal suffering or collective conflict, what is left? Are we just doomed to bounce back and forth between chasing empty rewards and fighting ideological battles until we burn out?
It is a bleak picture if we stop there. Fortunately, the source material provides an alternative. It introduces the third structural layer, which it calls the cruise state.
The cruise state.
This is a state of baseline stability. It's a mode of operating that is far less dependent on constant stimulation. and completely detached from heavy, conflict-driven emotional narratives.
I have to say, the mechanics of this are fascinating. What does it actually look like under the hood? What's happening in the brain when someone drops into this baseline stability?
The neural characteristics of the cruise state shift away from both the frantic reward-seeking and the high-alert error detection. First, you see a significantly reduced activity in the default mode network, or the DMN.
Okay,
The DMN is essentially the narrator in your head. It's the network that's active when you're daydreaming, worrying about the future, ruminating on a past conversation, or obsessing over your sense of self.
it's the overthinker.
Exactly. In the cruise state, that narrator quiets down.
That alone sounds like a relief.
It is. Second, there is reduced salience amplification. Salience is basically how much importance your brain assigns to a piece of information.
Oh, I see.
When salience amplification is high, your brain treats every minor annoyance as a massive emergency, or every minor cue as a desperately needed reward. In the cruise state, the volume knob on reality is turned down to a normal level.
Nice.
And finally, you have a stable baseline arousal. Your nervous system isn't constantly spiking with adrenaline and crashing into exhaustion. It maintains a steady, even keel.
And what does that actually look like for you, the listener, in your day-to-day life? The text lists some behavioral outcomes that sound almost too good to be true.
They do sound incredible.
In the cruise state, there is an absence of boredom. You have highly stable attention. You experience reduced emotional persistence.
Meaning, if a car cuts you off in traffic, the annoyance passes in a few seconds rather than ruining your mood for the entire morning.
Exactly. And you gain the ability to take spontaneous action without needing a surge of motivation.
That last point about spontaneous action is vital because the cruise state completely upends our conventional model of behavior. Think about how we usually operate.
Okay.
The standard structure we're taught is motivation leads to desire, which then leads to action. You have to do something or feel deeply inspired to do it before you act.
Right, you need a reason.
But in the cruise state, you are rewiring that structure entirely. Behavior simply emerges naturally from the current situation.
But wait, let me push back on this for a second. If I'm not chasing a dopamine reward and I don't have some grand emotional narrative driving me, why would I do anything at all?
It's a fair question.
Isn't the cruise state just a fancy term for apathy? If I don't care about the narrative of having a clean house, why wouldn't I just let the dishes pile up in the sink forever? How does this keep us from just turning into couch potatoes?
It's a common misconception, but apathy is actually a product of a burnout dopamine or emotional system. The cruise state is not apathy. It is situational appropriateness.
Situational appropriateness.
Yes. You don't wash the dishes because you need the dopamine hit of crossing it off a list. And you don't do it because you have a grand moral narrative about cleanliness being next to godliness. You wash the dishes simply because there are dirty dishes in the sink, and washing them is the appropriate action for that moment.
So the action is its own justification. You just do it and move on.
Exactly that. No grand narrative required. The situation dictates the response, and the brain accepts that without needing to spin a story about it.
If we're sitting in this cruise state, just taking action as the situation demands, what happens when the situation is actually hurting us? The source material makes a really interesting distinction here between just feeling pain and actually suffering. This is incredibly relatable.
It is perhaps the most practical application of this entire model. The text breaks the experience of pain down into two very distinct components. The first component is simply sensory pain.
Okay.
This is the raw, physical signal of damage or stress.
Let's use a universal example. You wake up at 2 a.m. to get a glass of water, and you absolutely smash your toe into the corner of the bed frame.
A perfect example. The physical signal from your toe traveling up your nervous system is processed by the somatosensory cortex and the thalamus. The structure here is entirely linear and biological. You have a stimulus, and that results in sensory pain. It hurts.
Right, it hurts immensely, but that's only half the story. The second part is suffering. And the text defines suffering as the emotional and narrative amplification of that sensory pain. So you stub your toe and suddenly your internal monologue kicks in. Why does this always happen to me? I'm so clumsy. Now my toe is going to throb. I won't get back to sleep. I'm going to be exhausted for my big meeting tomorrow. The universe just hates me today.
That narrative amplification is the suffering, and it's processed in entirely different regions of the brain.
Right.
When you start spinning that story, the anterior cingulate cortex and the amygdala flare up, and the default mode network kicks into overdrive to weave a story about what this stubbed toe means for your identity and your future.
So the structure extends. It goes from stimulus to pain to narrative to suffering.
Exactly. But the text explains that the cruise state physically shortens this chain. This is the fix.
How does that work?
If you are operating in that baseline stability where the DMN is quiet, the sensory pain remains. Your toe is still throbbing in the dark,
Mm.
but the suffering amplification is drastically reduced.
Because the narrator is quiet.
Yes. You don't spin the catastrophic story, so you don't suffer psychologically. It's just a sensation, and sensations eventually pass.
The cruise state separates the physical reality of the moment from the psychological burden we usually attach to it.
You experience the world as it is, not as your brain fears it might be. And this brings us to how this model forces us to rethink our desires entirely.
The text identifies three primary sources of human desire, right?
Yes, there is dopamine desire, which is the craving for a reward, novelty, or stimulation. There is emotional desire, which is the craving for a narrative, meaning, or a sense of justice. And finally, there are biological signals, craving homeostasis, like needing food, water, or sleep.
And if you are effectively operating in the cruise state, those first two drop away. The frantic craving for the dopamine hit diminishes. The desperate need for a grand emotional narrative to justify your existence quiets down.
Leaving you with what?
Primarily biological signals. You eat because your body requires nourishment, not because you're stressed about a work email.
Which perfectly aligns with the ultimate paradigm shift the text offers.
Yeah.
The concept of action without narrative meaning. Most of us are deeply conditioned to believe that without meaning, we cannot act.
Right. The common cultural model is that meaning creates purpose, and purpose drives action. If you don't have a deeply meaningful purpose, society tells you that you're lost, or lazy, or broken.
We're constantly told we need a mission, a destiny, a calling to get out of bed in the morning. But in a state of baseline stability, the structure of action is infinitely simpler. It's just situation, followed by appropriate action.
That shift removes an immense psychological weight. Action becomes based on what is practically required right now, rather than what it means for your existential identity.
So what does this all mean?
It means releasing the burden of destiny. You don't always need a grand mission to justify your life. You don't need an existential purpose to take out the trash or do your job or be kind to a neighbor.
No, you don't.
You can just do what the situation requires of you in that exact moment, and that is completely enough. It doesn't make you apathetic, it makes you free.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we can see the full structural architecture of human motivation laid bare. The stimulation layer, while useful for our ancestors foraging for survival, brings us modern behavioral addiction, constant escalation, and deep psychological dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
The emotional layer gives us a powerful sense of collective identity, but at the terrible cost of ideological conflict, polarization, and justified aggression against one another.
But the cruise.
This quiet, baseline stability offers an entirely different path forward. It brings stable attention, a severely reduced dependence on external stimuli, and the ability to take action without the need for desperate desire.
And most importantly, it allows us to experience the inevitable discomforts of life, the stubbed toes and the difficult moments, with drastically reduced psychological suffering.
It is truly a remarkable framework.
It really is. For you listening right now, just having this knowledge in your back pocket is incredibly valuable as a superpower. Being able to pause during your day and simply recognize which motivational layer is driving you in any given moment can help you avoid so much unnecessary burnout and frustration.
Just ask yourself, are you mindlessly chasing a dopamine horizon right now?
Are you wrapped up in a fiery, emotional narrative of us versus them over something minor?
Or can you take a breath, drop into that cruise state, quiet the narrator, and just handle the situation in front of you? It allows you to step off the treadmill and actually observe your own neural mechanics in real time.
That observation alone is a tremendous step toward mental clarity. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over today.
Let's hear it.
We've seen that the cruise state removes the need for grand moral narratives and dopamine-driven achievement. So what would a society look like if everyone managed to operate in this baseline stability? Would human progress and technological innovation grind to a halt without the frantic, desperate push of dopamine and destiny? Or would we finally achieve world peace because we stopped turning our raw aggression into moral crusades? Think about it.
It's a profound paradox to consider.
It certainly leaves you with a lot to chew on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the structures of motivation and suffering. Keep questioning the systems around you, keep observing your own mind, and above all, keep digging into your curiosity. We'll catch you next time.